Extracurriculars were a meaningful part of the Regis experience even during the school's early years. However, compared to today, the number of clubs was much more limited. Nevertheless, the class of 1941 benefited from a modest expansion of special interest clubs in the late 1930s. They were groups that catered to hobbies such as photography and board games such as chess and checkers. The printing club was Regis's earliest outlet for artistic endeavors, although it was formed with more practical purposes in mind. The club was responsible for creating posters and pamphlets for school events. The Press Relations Committee was a student-led outreach initiative that sought to promote Regis's public visibility. One upside to having fewer clubs was that some activities, such as the chess, model, and stamp clubs, were provided dedicated rooms on the third floor at Regis. Some clubs drew such great interest that moderators and student leaders had to find ways to qualify applicants to keep membership manageable. The Model Club was one of them. The group shared an interest in model ships and airplanes. At its height in popularity, the club would ask potential members to first audition their best works. The Model Club would be a group that Bill Carroll would eagerly join after being fascinated by the spirit of St. Louis up close as a child. Some of the larger student organizations were more academic in focus. Given the limited offerings of science courses in those early days, the Pasteur Club played an important role in providing extracurricular exposure to the study of chemistry. In 1939, a new group called the Academy of Modern History was formed, ostensibly to examine issues relating to international order and the sovereignty of nations. It was likely inspired by the widespread turmoil that was engulfing much of Europe during that period. There were also organizations built around linguistics. While Italian was not part of the curriculum, the Italian Academy provided an important forum for the study of the language. The Academy had a successful launch during the 1941 boys' sophomore year, boosted by a generous donation of 500 books from the Italian government. There was also a language club for French. Up until 1943, Regis was one of the few schools that mandated the study of Greek. It was part of the curriculum for 2 years. Those who felt inspired to continue with a more intensive study of the ancient language would join the Homeric Academy. Members would recite classic Greek works and translate books that made up Homer's Iliad. But arguably, one of the most significant student activities even back then was theater. The Regis Dramatic Society would put on 2 major productions each year, one in each semester. One would typically be Shakespearean, and the other a modern play. The society would also regularly organize shorter, no-frills performances during the school year. In the 1930s, theater played a deeper role as not just a form of entertainment, but also as an occasion for Regis families to gather at school. Performances were always well attended, with seats filled up to the 3rd level of the auditorium. Auditions for choice roles were also quite competitive, and individual performances were known to be well scrutinized and critiqued by fellow Regians afterwards. Bernard Lavin would be a mainstay on the Regis stage. The youngest of 3 children, Bernard lived in the Bronx. Like most other Regis boys, home life was modest. His father worked as a waiter to support the family. Bernard was somewhat of a Renaissance man. He was athletically built and enjoyed playing football and baseball. And after joining his parish choir, he discovered a passion for music and singing, especially opera. Bernard also loved Latin, Greek, and reading poetry. He became fascinated with learning Chinese and studying Asian cultures, which perhaps was an early hint at his future. At Regis, Bernard would soon discover his talent for theater. although he first established himself as a skilled orator with the Hern, regularly leading Regis in various oratorical competitions. Nevertheless, it was on the stage where Bernard would eventually anchor his reputation. But before he could land leading roles as an upperclassman, Bernard had to first pay his dues with minor roles as a freshman and sophomore. Another who sought out the dramatic society early on was James Murphy. Like Bernard, James came from a similarly modest background.
My father was one of 6 children growing up in Manhattan, New York. His mother was an Irish immigrant, and his father was the son of Irish immigrants. They lived at 1097 3rd Avenue in New York City in a 3-room apartment. They were a very religious family, belonging to the St. Vincent Ferrer parish. Jim's father was a baggage carrier for the Waldorf Astoria, and he would pick up the hotel guests' luggage from the train station and deliver it to the hotel by horse and carriage. It was very common for relatives to live together as they were relocating from Ireland, and this was the case with his mother's sister. I remember my father telling me that he lived with her in her apartment with her husband because they didn't have any children, so there was plenty of room. And I believe that this arrangement was made because his parents must have recognized that he was very bright and they wanted to give him the room that he needed to excel in school. My father was an altar boy, sang in the church choir, and loved attending Mass. He was pictured on an Easter flyer singing hymns.
He was also involved in theater before entering Regis. In his first foray into Regis theater as a freshman, James actually landed a named speaking role in Shakespeare's As You Like It. He played the thin-skinned and sarcastic Phoebe, the love interest of Silvius the Shepherd. James actually received accolades for his performance. During that era, Regis plays were not jointly organized with neighboring girls' schools. Perhaps Regis also took its classical legacy to an extreme where all Shakespearean roles were traditionally played by men. It's noteworthy that only freshmen played female characters. It was reasoned that the younger Regians were better suited for those gender roles because of their smaller size and higher-pitched voices. How James perceived his experience is unclear. What we do know is that he never stepped foot on the Regis stage again. However, the play may have planted the seeds for a different skill that James would develop over time. In those days, the Regis Dramatic Society played another important role at school. It was the only activity that was not only self-funded, but turned in a meaningful surplus. Even though athletics would often show a larger positive balance at the end of the year, that included funding from the annual budget. Those net proceeds frequently funded much-needed equipment and upgrades throughout Regis. Performances were therefore widely publicized. At the time of the As You Like It performance, James unveiled his knack for fundraising when he won the prize for selling the most tickets to the show. It would be a nascent preview of his marketing skills that would extend not just into his career, but for the benefit of Regis over the long term, well into the next century. Undoubtedly, one of the happiest student groups at Regis is the stage crew. At a time when workplace safety regulations were non-existent and when students were still allowed to climb above a footstool, the merry band of backstage members had the thankless but most fun jobs. John Tooby, who also went by Sam amongst his friends, was one of those Regis boys who was active in stage crew. A lifelong resident of Brooklyn, he was the only son in a family of 4. While John also devoted much of his extracurricular time to Regis publications, he found the building of theater sets and organizing things behind the scene to be enjoyable. He was your typical Regis boy. While not a standout in any particular way at school, John was an earnest individual, which made him one of the most popular boys amongst his peers. George Better was another member of the class of 1941 who was similarly quiet and well-loved by his classmates. By the time he was a senior, George was known as that kid who would never refuse a request for help from anyone in the whole school. A resident of the Bronx, George was the only child in a working-class household. His father was employed at a railroad company, while his mother was a machine operator at a local factory. Like John Toohey, George preferred to maintain an unassuming profile at Regis. The two would work together in the background with the Dramatic Society, in stage operations, and later on the business side. Complementing the Dramatic Society was the Regis Orchestra. The orchestra was quite an active group. Not only did they provide music accompaniment during theater productions, they would also provide entertainment during lectures and debates. Two boys in the class of 1941 would be regulars in the orchestra from their freshman through senior years. Leo Salties would be a standout on strings, while Ed Dolan would be a mainstay on the piano. As active musicians at school, both would help lead the Regis Orchestra to various city-level competitions. Debating was already an established part of Regis in the 30s. At the time the class of 1941 entered Regis, the debating society was classified under different names based on grades. Freshmen were part of the Loyola Debating Society, before they moved up to the Chrysostom Debating Society for sophomores. Upperclassmen would then join the Hearn Debating Society. Both the freshman and sophomore debating clubs would be renamed the Archdeacon and Kilroy Debating Societies. And for a while, there was also a new group called the Junior Speakers Guild to differentiate upperclassmen. Eventually, someone put a stop to the changes, and all Regis debaters would fall under the Hearn Debating Society. Above all extracurriculars at Regis in the 1930s, it was religious associations that seemingly held the highest prominence. The Sodality and Guard of Honor groups had grown in strength at Regis by the time the class of 1941 entered the school. In addition to participating in works of service and charity, members in each group had varying levels of commitment to religious piety, including attending daily masses and having confessions heard each week. At its height, the Sodality could count nearly every senior as having been a member of the group during their time at Regis. There was also the Sanctuary Society, the forerunner of today's Jogue Society of sacristans and altar servers at school. And the Mission Club, a group that sought to raise funds and resources for Catholic missionaries and charities. Previously called the Stamp Club, the legacy of the Mission Club would eventually expand dramatically to Regis's Catalyst Service umbrella today.